I want to open it up to you all too, in terms of what your questions are or observations on.
And maybe since it's not too large of a group, we can go around and just do a 10-second introduction, just your name, just so we know who people are and where you're from. Maybe we can start in the back.
Sure. My name is Roshan Paul. I currently work at Ashoka.
Nick Martin, I work at Tech Change. I have a degree in peace education.
My name is Grace Chow. I'm from Hong Kong, and I'm an ICAR master student.
Lori Stevenson, ICAR PhD student.
Gülmes Cioğlu, ICAR PhD student.
Betania Georgis, ICAR master student. I was just at the UN doing a 5 months of internship, so I can relate to everything that you're saying.
Hi, I'm Serene. I'm interning at Institute for Multi-Track Diplomacy.
Roland Wilson, PhD student.
Michael English, PhD student.
Caitlin Curry, master student.
Tamar Flange, master student.
Tom Richardson, ICAR master student.
Kelly Nariano, master student.
Andrew Hubbard, ICAR master student.
Samuel Johnson, ICAR PhD.
Jay Philippi, ICAR PhD.
I'm Matthew Gravel. I work in training related to international conflict prevention.
Susan Allen Mann, ICAR faculty.
Maha Dasi, I'm an ICAR certification student, looking to be an ICAR PhD. Serena, I'm a baseball student.
It's great that you're here.
She's going to be studying international relations at William and Mary this fall.
Thank you. So I'm interested, I guess, in your perspectives. I don't know if it's all right to also ask everyone else's perspectives, but I'd be interested in kind of multiple voices on how can ICAR specifically, and all of you have degrees from ICAR and know ICAR at one stage or other in ICAR's development, and it seems like most of us in this room have some connection with ICAR. How can this institution best engage in being relevant to the practitioners? How can we prepare students to be practitioners? How can we attract people who are already practitioners? What do they want from us? What can we offer advanced practitioners who don't have degrees, or who do have degrees in something else? You know, what would they get from us?
Let me, I'll answer that briefly. I want to take a long view also, and that is that I think many of us would say the field is about 25 years old. I mean, I would say, we could say the field started with the commencement of the master's degree program here in 1981, from a graduate standpoint. And so the field was 30 years old. And it is probably time now for the field to look within itself and to see what it is producing. And there's probably no better place to do some of that than here. So I will make that something to think about. I think one of the unique approaches that I'm seeing, and I've been reading about the proliferation, and proliferation I don't necessarily mean in a negative way, but the development of certificate programs that are tailored and are attracting particular individuals from particular sectors, that basically is running with this mainstreaming notion that is a combination of theory and practice in a very concentrated way that augments what somebody is already doing or already studying. I think that's a wonderful strategy. And I think I was reading an article, I think in the Chronicle of Higher Education a couple of weeks ago, that was saying that there's a higher academic trend for certificate programs that is undergoing right now. So I think ICAR putting its feet in that well, I think was a good thing.
Just a couple of things come to mind. So one is hiring Julie Shedd or having a career staff is incredibly important. And expanding that and making sure that ICAR builds very strong relationships and partnerships with employers, so that it's not just putting people in internships, but having intellectual partnerships, which I know our program does. So we'll sit and talk with practitioner organizations like, what are you struggling with? What are you working with? How does that fit with their research? Where can we work together? So really going beyond just the internship idea to try to fund field placements. The only university that I think is doing an amazing job at field placements is Notre Dame, because they have $100 million in private money. And as part of their program, students have to go for the in Rotary, the Peace Fellowships from Rotary. Very few other organizations or institutions have the unlimited budget.
I would add two things. One, ICAR, I mean, this is it's the US government and all of the money and various agencies that it pours into the field is right here. And it's the NGO capital of the US where most of the big players have an office right here. So for me, what ICAR needs to do and what all of the institutions, at least in the DC area, need to do is really start developing permanent, ongoing, good, strong relationships with all of those agencies and organizations. That will help develop internship opportunities, potentially joint projects. It would help the field out there know more about the programs and the students and what you're capable of, and vice versa. The academic programs here would know more about where's the thinking headed in the field. I'm sure. I mean, it has some, but maybe I'm talking past tense because I read. My last class was '97, but at the time, okay. I know this is being recorded, but I'm just gonna say that.
It's off the record.
Faculty are great here at ICAR, and I've learned a lot, and I don't want to, dismiss what I got from ICAR. But the work that I've actually done and do, I have gotten through the APT program. It was the only opportunity for practical experience, and using kind of what the general things that I've learned here at ICAR, but then really looking into the field and how does USAID talk about these things? How does Search for Common Ground do what they do? Looking at what are all these organizations, how do they think about these things, how do they program things? I mean, really learning that part, because it wasn't, that wasn't provided, at least when I was here. And faculty were doing their own individual research, which may have involved another organization, but most often not, in my experience. So they were cocooned in their own little worlds, but not interacting with DC. Hopefully that's changing, and because I think, it's a disservice, it's a crime almost, not to, because you have all the advantages here of what, just by the location, that there's programs in this field out all over the United States. 38 states have, degree programs in conflict resolution, from the Midwest to the coasts. And they don't have the advantages here. So take advantage of this opportunity. And let me just say one more thing, DC is a multicultural laboratory. So if you're interested in working overseas, even if you can't get there right now, there is a diaspora here, exactly. I mean, some of the best, most interesting work I've done was with gangs, Latino gangs here in DC, Northern Virginia area. That gave me a lot of perspective and knowledge about stuff going on in Central and South America. So when I went there, I had more of a clue. So using that is also a relatively unique opportunity in the United States, just based on the location here.
Yes, just Nikki, I appreciate what you're saying. The resources right there, but it's about making those connections between those resources. And what I do appreciate about the website that you've established, Craig, is that it tries to create that hub. What I'm wondering is, for example, coming from some practitioner experience in the international development sector, those people, they're so busy, they have no time to go searching for interns, people to come and do an evaluation report in Kenya, who can get a stipend for a month, for example, or stuff like that. Get the graduate students to be doing those short-term consultant kind of work, but those connections aren't being made. Does that make sense? And that's exactly what I think that the academic institutions could be making. Partnering with institutions and the graduate assistants can be doing the legwork, with a senior program officer of some sort. And so I guess it's that bridging that mid-career level kind of.
One of the challenges in all this, that I think is the underlying issue that I think is pointed out here, is being able to articulate what it is that we do and making that appealable to those that we want to meet us. It's like being in the market and selling something. Nobody knows what the thing is and nobody knows what to do with the thing, but it sounds very interesting and I'm not going to spend money on it. And I think this is the perennial challenge for our field, is that just like some of the comments, conflict resolution, yeah, 40-hour training, I'll have somebody do that. Isn't that what mediation's all about? Well, maybe, but there's a lot more than that. And I think that we have to make that case all the time in order to be able to make these other cases.
We have two questions, you and then
You know, we talk about people not knowing what we do. We talk about not having opportunities for the students to go overseas, to get the experience we need, practical experience. The field being young, the field's now 20, 30 years old, or whoever you want to ask, depending on the day. You have other disciplines out there to emulate, and all the other disciplines have all these great programs connecting all these different universities around the world and all these different institutions and foundations that are able to draw on this experience to get the students out there to do these things and get the experience they need. Why do we have to wait to grow to 40, 50, 60 years old to be able to do that for our discipline?
I don't think we have to do it, so I'd say one of the best things about mentors that I've had is they push me to apply for interesting opportunities. So I spend a lot of my time pushing all of our students to apply for every fellowship imaginable, because there's often ways to get funding to do what you want to do and get someone else to pay for it. And there are many fellowships. Some of them are restricted to only U.S. citizens. There's also a couple of things I want to say. So one is, if people haven't read the Hewlett report, Hewlett was the largest private foundation donor of this field for 20 years, $160 million. They cut off their funding in 2005. Our organization got one of the last grants. Read their report because it has a history of the field, but also says why they stopped funding it. Part of it's foundations changed their program priorities. A big part of it is that they didn't see the return on their investments. So Nika mentioned evaluation. Evaluation is one of the most critical things, but how do we demonstrate that what we claim to be doing we actually can do? And then one other point I wanted to mention is that I'm all for people going overseas, but there is a danger of conflict tourism. And there needs to be more research on this because it's, and I've been part of it too, is that people go to Northern Ireland, Cyprus, Israel, Palestine, and a few other Bosnia to do this 1 to 2 week to 3 week programs. And I'm very skeptical of them because actually the net return is that there's often a negative impact, and then people will claim they're experts. So the question is, how do we create long-term meaningful partnerships where people are providing a benefit, not just getting information for themselves, but to their host countries and organizations?
Okay. I think I have to go pretty shortly to the class,
Yeah,
but
we do.
In the interest of full disclosure, I wanted to say that I had a lot of experience in grassroots activism, community building, project development, that sort of stuff. And I came to a graduate program not for the skills, because I think that's something that you get in undergrad and in work. And I came for the theory specifically. So I kind of push back against the whole graduate program should be training you in these things. These are kind of things that I feel that you develop as you get your experience.
You're a PhD student?
Yeah.
Okay. And I would make that distinction also.
Well, no, and I came here as a master's student, trying to get more theory and to understand what it is that I was doing better. But what I was interested in is if you could explain a little bit in your study what the universities that you chose were, where they were located, and because you said they weren't all in conflict, and if you could give a little bit more detail about some of the details of your sample.
I happen to have the list with me. We had American University, George Mason, obviously, George Washington, the Elliott School of International Affairs, Georgetown, Harvard, Kennedy School of Harvard, SAIS at Hopkins. We also did the School of Public Health at Hopkins, and one of the reasons for that was, you would think, why would you pick them? But because of that cross-sectoral work, a lot of the programs that are working on health or economics or other programs, realizing, kind of figured out that we work in these countries where there's poverty, where there's health disasters, and part of the reason for that is because of all the conflicts that are occurring there. So they're mainstream. We're bringing in conflict analysis and resolution theory into those programs, and also some of the practical skills for when they go out in the field. We also did the Naval Postgraduate School, University of Carolina, Chapel Hill School of Public Health, and the U.S. Army War College. So it's not, as we were talking earlier, it's not a comprehensive list. And David, you could probably speak a little bit more about why them and not others.
And also the organizations that you chose.
let me respond to the schools first of all. I mean, we were very specific as to what our cohorts were, that is, the organizations and institutions that we were working with, that we felt that representing the most clearly consistent with our own mission, graduates that were working in the field. I would tell you that there are probably close to 100, I'm looking at Brian Pokinghorn's last study, 100 graduate programs, I'm not sure if it's US, probably US based, that focus on one dimension of conflict resolution or not, everything from 80 R&D studies. So, we were looking at a small sliver of things that were most relevant to USIP. I think that's something we would welcome, maybe looking at this more aggregate 100 field, maybe something to do.
So the organizations were Agency for Educational Development, Catholic Relief Services, Chemonics, International Alert, International Crisis Group, Mercy Corps, the Conflict Management Group, which is now part of Mercy Corps, MSI, consulting firm, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the Mission to Bosnia and Herzegovina, CADCO, consulting firm, Partners for Democratic Change, Search for Common Ground, UNDP, USAID, the Office for Post-Conflict Reconstruction and Stabilization at State Department, the Conflict Prevention and Reconstruction Unit at World Bank, and others. So again, a cross-section of NGOs, for-profit consulting firms, U.S. government agencies, and also some of the international agencies. So again, not a comprehensive list, but a cross-section. And I want to just, because I did, Craig and I both did our PhDs here too, so I want to acknowledge that, if you're focused on the PhD, that is theory, because the notion of getting the PhD generally is trying to prepare people for research or academics. And so, what we were focusing on was the master's programs, because that's where people were more likely to be going and looking for work in one of these kinds of organizations rather than working in academia. So I agree with what you're saying, and that just wasn't our focus.
But there is a need to do a study at the PhD level of people with multi-interdisciplinary degrees. How successful are they at getting jobs in academia versus, because we have an interdisciplinary in conflict versus a PhD in IR, and you're applying for an IR job with a conflict focus. So I haven't seen rigorous research on that. It'd be interesting. My sense is most ICAR PhDs eventually get academic jobs and want to, but some find it challenging.
You had kind of ended with the idea of mainstreaming. I was wondering if you could say a little bit more, what were you thinking about that?
So if anybody, other people here have worked on any type of USAID funded proposal or project. So when you write a funding proposal these days for USAID, there's a paragraph saying you're going to be, talk about how you're going to mainstream gender, talk about how you're going to mainstream health, youth, HIV, and it works a lot in practice. And so one of the aspects of the practice work I've tried to do is help work with humanitarian development workers to mainstream conflict. But they already have on their list, I got to mainstream gender. So it's like they're over mainstreamed. And so when you come to them as a conflict person and say, oh, conflict's important, but they have these 10 other things they already have to do, so how do we balance? I wouldn't say it's competing mainstreaming, we haven't come up with a framework about what does it mean to mainstream all these things, because is it an add-on to your program, so you check off the box saying, we're gender sensitive because we said we're going to include women. That's not gender sensitive. Or we're youth sensitive because we said we're going to talk to youth. Or is it really integrating these things into the heart of all programming? And we haven't found, in my opinion, an adequate way to mainstream all these different sectors within specific programming. So it's something the entire development field and conflict resolution field are struggling with.
And part of that is, the research will say that gender, for example, is an important issue to discuss, or conflict, or whatever the issue is. And so funders will, write in their request for proposals that you need to include these things. So the organizations respond to that, but they may, have no clue as to what that really means. So again, that's where you get the checkbox mentality as opposed to real programming that's grounded in some real, theory or research or experience. And I think that's one of the things that, ICAR can contribute and other academic institutions can contribute to those organizations, is to provide that theoretical research background that helps them, you know, and help them connect what they're doing to that. So it's not just about connecting theory to practice, but also practice to theory. So there was a hand.
David, you had made a statement at the beginning that when the report was done, USIP then decided that instead of pursuing a relationship, I guess, with graduate programs to change this, they decided to do their own academy more focused on practice. Can you speak more to why they thought it was a better idea to engage in kind of a market in their own training as opposed to?
Well, in some respects, we wanted to respect the purview of graduate education. And I think we wanted to, first of all, see what the gaps were in graduate education. Once we find it, one of the things I think this report does is it makes recommendations for remedying it. And these are not recommendations that we as an institute really could solve, in a sense. I believe there were 10 or 15 recommendations in the first round, and I think 2 or 3 of them were things that we could do in our program that we developed on conflict management. So what we realized was there's another arena for us, and it really came from the calls that we were getting, not from graduate programs or even graduate students, but from mid-level State Department, Army officers, and people that were going to be deployed in PRTs, and people that were working for NGOs, and more short-term training, but very focused training. And we said that's where we need to go. We need to support this process, but we don't want to be perceived as competing with graduate education. That's the other thing that was critical for us, because we want to supplement graduate education to the extent that we can, but we don't want to be perceived as being an easy place that you can go in lieu of a graduate program. We're not a certificate program like ICAR. We want people to go to a place like ICAR and then maybe come to us for something that we can add value to.
So 2 quick questions. You said that you had received some critical feedback from academic institutions, and that much of that was to do with things that are a problem for all higher ed in the U.S. So I'm curious if there were any of this feedback that didn't fall in that category, that was specific to this particular field or your study. And then my second question is, did you ask the employers the question of of the employees that you have that have this degree, are there people with another kind of degree that are better? And or did you hear them talk about other kinds of degrees that provided better training for that work?
So in terms of feedback, so we did get some feedback from some academic programs that were saying, why didn't you include us? Because we actually think we're doing everything in the report that you say should be done. So there was some offense of that. I mean, some feedback came back saying we disagree with your findings. Some came back saying we agree with most of it, but you didn't have to be so critical. And then, you know, in a few institutions, only 1 or 2, which I won't name, said, we can't believe you published that because, you know, we're perfect, we don't do that. and they might, I think they do, you know, we didn't survey them, so we can't say how well they met this. In terms of the feedback, I mean, Nika can offer her feedback, but a couple employers, and some employers are actually critical of conflict resolution degrees. I don't want to say this was all employers, and I heard this in the first round of ACT research saying that because a lot of conflict resolution programs focus significantly on theory, that they're training people who are coming out filled with all these theories, and that they don't know how to translate those theories to the real world. And one person at USIP said to me, often people don't realize it's a choice between the least worst option, not the best theory. And that, I think I say this is a minority, but 1 or 2 employers said they actually don't want to hire, this is conflict organizations, they don't want to hire people with conflict degrees because they're too theoretical and they don't have these practical skills they need. But I don't think that's the majority.
I mean, I just want to add that some of the specific comments that academics were saying is that, you know, that we didn't talk about the importance of critical thinking skills and you know, ethics and, I mean, some of those other things. And, you know, that was in there, but, you know, it just wasn't high on the list, so that's not what we reported. You know, and that's what I think we mean when we say, you know, that kind of thought is relevant to other degree programs too. It's the question of what is the purpose of academia? Is it to do, you know, the critical thinking and analytical, creative, put 2 and 2 together and come up with 6? You know, as opposed to, is it a professional degree or is it a more liberal arts type of degree? And that's I think one of the bigger questions for the field, and what David and Craig were mentioning earlier about, this is a debate going on, not just related to this kind of program, but every program in the U.S.
I mean, I think that one of the questions is that what is the purpose of a master's degree? Is a master's degree in the field akin to getting a JD or an MD or a master's in social work? If it's an MSW, which is a very applied degree, then we need to rethink a lot of the things that we're doing. If that's not what it's like, if getting a master's in conflict resolution is like getting a master's in history, literature, okay, well, then that's very different. And I don't know where we are. I think, we're kind of between those two worlds to some extent.
The report is extraordinary for us, as you can imagine. It's nice to have 3 ICAR alumni working on this at the time in which ICAR is becoming a school. So this debate is clearly very relevant for us. And it's very clear that the report focuses on a piece of ICAR, that is the master program. I'm sorry I was late, and I understand well the distinction with undergraduate education, the certificate and the PhD. But in thinking a redesigned master program at ICAR, not in general. In a way, I'm speaking more to the alumni than to the USIP researchers. What would be your take? What would be your advice? What would be your feedback? I understand the suggestion in the report, but how do you see those suggestions in a way relating to ICAR and your experience at ICAR?
One of the things I said before is I think there's a role for a master's degree, and I think there's a role for a certificate, and I think there's a role for a PhD, and I think we have to be more explicit as to what the differences are between those 3 and why they're useful. I think a PhD is pretty clear, mostly, that it's not a practitioner degree. And I think a certificate, is emerging as a very practitioner-oriented focus for people who are really trying to marry that with something else. So the question is where's the master's degree, between that and the two, and what is its function? And I think a lot of a master's degree experience for an individual turns on their thesis. Does that become the all-driving focus of their experience here? So we have to think resume thing. That is, on a resume, when you get a master's degree, an MS from ICAR, you put right under that, my thesis was X. And so that becomes your sub-specialty, or becomes your focus in a sense. So maybe we have to be more cognizant of the types of theses that people are doing and helping to form them better in a way that reflects particular streams of practice, maybe. I don't know if I would look at the curriculum as much as look at what students are trying to end up with in their expertise level.
Yeah, and just did the PhD ICAR, not the master's. So a couple of ideas I think I mentioned them. One is I think all academic programs that don't integrate mainstreaming as a central component of everything they do are doing their students a disservice, because again, most people are not going to get jobs directly in conflict resolution. So I think it needs to be integrated from foundation of the theory course to the skills courses to thesis. So helping people come out of ICAR saying this, and I think a lot of students do, but it can be structured better, saying I'm a conflict resolution expert focused on this sectoral area, this geographic area. So I think that's one thing. I think making sure that it's articulated that this field's a business and understanding how this operates as a business, both ethically and practically. Because I would say in the PhD training I got, there was no discussion of it. It was the APT course was helpful for me, but that still didn't touch on the business aspects. So I think people coming out fluent in, so who are the donors, what are the ethical debates, what is policy, what does it mean that the majority of this field in the US is funded by the government? So actually, are we even independent? Like So what are we doing as a field when so much of our funding comes from one primary, so in different government agencies? And can we be ethical? So I think having people really steeped in that aspect of the business debate, and then again, more career mentoring, like 10 more Julie Sheds, or and also I don't know if this is happening, but Georgetown we're trying to build the alumni network. So are other alum hiring current ICAR students? Are they? So we're trying to push that. So I got an email this week saying I want one of our current students to come work for me. So making sure it's more like the building the internal alumni capacity. And I think ICAR is doing a good job at. I don't know if there's any metrics on that.
I would just add that what's already been said is, going back to David's question about, is the master's program like a JD or an MSW? I would actually like it to be that way, and those kinds of programs have a clinical program attached to it, so you do practice as part of the degree program. So, there are models out there I think ICAR could look at to see how is that feasible. I would just say, going back to, the APT experience for me, and I was very fortunate because I got to work on two really hands-on practical projects. That launched my consulting career. I don't think I've, in terms of theories and things like that, it's in the back of my head. Have I ever mentioned any of those theories in any of my practice? Maybe a couple times in a training, relative deprivation came up, and people actually like that theory, find it useful. But, it was the hands-on work that I got to do through the experience at ICAR that was the most beneficial. And I don't want to take away from everything else I got here, but that's where I was able to put theory into practice, and I would say not really consciously either. Because to be honest, it was, here, you're going to facilitate a dialogue between community police officers and gangs. Okay, have I had a facilitation class? No. Well, no, I had, but that was, years before. Have I ever worked with gangs? No. Had I worked with police? A little bit, but it's like I had really no qualifications to do this, and yet the organization that asked us to do this still thought we could be helpful. So it was kind of by the seat of our pants. It wasn't just me, but several people, that we made it work, and it worked well. But it was, I don't know how much of it was because of what we learned at ICAR, or that we were just very creative on the fly and could address the needs as they arose, or what that was. But I think if ICAR could take opportunities like that and make them more thoughtful, so that you don't potentially do harm, and you're thrown into these practice opportunities. So that's all I'll say.
Let me add one more thing. This is a hopeful sign. I'm part of a U.S. government ICAR group that has lunch periodically. We haven't had lunch probably about 2 or 3 months, but we have lunch periodically. And we've been trying to grow that. I mean, we're very cognizant now as those working in the field of, one thing I would say is that there is an ICAR perspective. You walk out of an ICAR experience, be it master's or PhD, and there's a way that you look at things, and you're looking at things on the edges, you're looking at things upside down, you're looking at things in a very creative way. I was talking to a colleague of mine the other day who's considering applying to ICAR, and the way she thinks about things, I said, you need to go to ICAR. These other places, I don't know, but you're very valuable here. So we walk out thinking a certain way, and now we're starting to get together, and a lot of us are government people. Now, an ICAR perspective in government, provided you don't lose that ICAR perspective, government has a way of kind of whittling you down sometimes. I think it's very important, and I think that is building that idea of people getting together and developing that I'll hire an ICAR graduate. Why? Well, because they just think in a creative way. They're looking at things in a way that's very valuable, and uncovering things that everyone else is seeing.
Can I ask one further question? Nobody else has any?
I was looking at some of the pieces and how international experience was highlighted so strongly from the employers. And there was listed a couple times some of the language skills, but usually at the bottom. And I was wondering if that was kind of reflective of what you heard. And kind of, I guess from my own experience, feeling like it seems often to be a tag that's kind of tacked on at the end that says extremely important, very, very worthwhile and necessary, and then it turns out not to be.
Actually, I would say for the employers, it was important. It was probably, it was within the third top KSA because, you know, we've moved, the field has moved away from, you know, there's two areas. One, the field has developed enough people in other countries where they don't need to get, you know, they don't need to come to us Americans and Europeans anymore for this. They have their own institutions, their own academic programs, and, you know, are doing, and they're the best place, obviously, to work on their issues. So when somebody's going to send somebody from the U.S. or elsewhere, it really is helpful to know the language because now you're also competing with not only other, you know, folks here, but you're competing with folks from the countries or from the regions in which these conflicts are happening. And the whole notion of, you know, that language is part of the multicultural skills that they expect. It's not just the language per se. Somebody can speak French or whatever, but still not understand anything about, you know, the country that they've been asked to do work in. So it goes hand in hand with that historical knowledge or context or something about the culture in addition to the language.
To follow up kind of on the business end, did businesses, if we're looking at this as a completely interest-based operation, did they say what they were willing to invest in students? Because it doesn't seem like a lot of them are willing to invest anything, and it's all on the student to put that up front with no guarantee on the other end that their skills are even going to be reciprocated, especially with internships when you leave and you thought you developed a relationship with somebody and then they kind of string you along for 5 to 10 years to tell you that there's no position, but you can keep showing up and doing what you've been doing and they appreciate it.
So the first thing I would say is that it's the number of job applications. So for a single opening back in the original hack research, typical openings would have between 30 and 300 applications. In this economic climate, it's gone up. So I'd say most jobs are getting at least 100 applicants per opening. If it's widely advertised, often 200 to 300. Often people are overqualified. You know, so we're saying someone with 2 to 3 years experience are getting people with 7 to 8 years experience. So there's the supply side is much more than demand right now. I think most employers are willing to invest in people professionally if you have enough basic skills. And so if you understand the field, you speak a language, you have some project management experience, you're skilled in conflict resolution, a lot of employers will then give you additional training. But people need to have that basis, and when the job market's so competitive and there might be someone else who has everything you have plus, you know, 3 years direct experience, then they're not going to make that decision to train you. The other thing is just think strategic about where you can get jobs. Most people in this field think nonprofit government. There's so many other sectors that people can go into. Most students never think about the field of business or social entrepreneurship. We've got 1 or 2 alum working in venture capital, doing amazing work on conflict in Africa. So I think the scope of what students think about in terms of employment, we have the responsibility to broaden it up beyond, you know, multilateral institutions, NGOs, and government, foundations, education, business. So there's a lot of other areas to go into, and often if your dream is to work for the government, you're not going to get hired in government directly, start a nonprofit, consulting firm. You're just thinking about strategically how to advance.
And think about where you already are. Many of you are already in situations that there may be opportunities within that to take a conflict lens and promote what you're doing. I mean, quite often we think about getting hired somewhere else rather than working within our environment. I think what Craig is saying is very important. Our own entrepreneurial skills, I think, are very important, and being able to use them in these circumstances, I think, are vital. And I mean, one of the great developments is CSR, corporate social responsibility. Corporate social responsibility is corporations wanting to do the right thing, and often the right thing for many of them is being conflict sensitive. So, you know, do you work for a corporation that's involved in business overseas that isn't looking at it in that way? Maybe it's time for you to promote it.
And the one thing, just say from a career perspective, I think Julie does this, is that nowadays, and Nick can say a lot about this, to have a successful career for most younger people, you have to craft an online professional identity and create it yourself without being authentic, because you can be inauthentic. So you start crafting an identity, or you're the person who knows about conflict in this subject. And so you kind of create an identity through blogging or Twitter or whatever it is. Then as long as you don't say anything too critical, if you want to work for the government, you say the government sucks. In your blog, so you have to be authentic without crossing a line. But having that online identity, I taught at University of Peace, and one of my alum got hired, for one of my students. She was just doing amazing work online about peace education. So when she applied for the job, the employer's like, "Oh, you already know what you're doing." So it's like kind of having that identity helps a lot. So and Nick's one of the experts in new media, says does ICAR have a course not just about media but new media? Is there a course in business and conflict? So I think those are some of the sectors.
I was going to ask, given the current job market, since it is mainly interest-based when it comes to non-governmental organizations and corporations, was there that much criticism on you, given all the other fields that are going through the same kinds of studies and trying to find the same kinds of things? Like, even in the field of law, you're churning out thousands of lawyers every year, and they're having just as hard of a time now. Or the medical field, you have millions of doctors that don't have nurses to help them out because the nursing industry went through such a plunge a couple of years ago. Are you finding more criticism in this field, or is it pretty much equal out, just about the same over the fields?
I think, Andrew, you raised a good question, because I often read other fields also, and I think there's a lot of angst in these other fields. I think I have a JD, and I know that field is really contracting also. And I was reading about the student that went on a hunger strike because they couldn't get a job, and they thought this was a novel approach, and I don't know if he ever got a job or not. I'm not suggesting that. But so I think all fields at the graduate level are really trying to figure out in this economy where they fit in. And I think one of the things that Craig is saying is what you have when this takes place is you've got people who are overqualified, applying for jobs that they shouldn't be applying for. We see that a lot where we are, where we've got program assistants, which is an admin job, and master's degree students, graduates are applying for those jobs. It's not an appropriate job for a master's degree graduate necessarily. So I think it's happening a lot.
Well, so thank you for those of you coming out tonight. Some of you who may be skipping your classes, because I know classes started at 7:20. I saw a few people who had to sneak out. I want to thank the ICAR Student Association, ISA, for being a co-sponsor for the event and helping with the organizing for it, and for our panelists for coming and talking about the report and what I hope is an ongoing conversation, because I think there were issues raised here about what does ICAR need to be doing, what should we be contributing to this, what are the opportunities to contribute. I think there are larger conversations about the relationship between academic programs and academic purposes in general, and employer and the interest-based conversation. So I really do hope to find some venues to continue the exploration of, because I think what we're doing is engaging with conflict, that we have a larger purpose in mind and how to get there and what we should be doing and where we need to be better. And I think, I hope, continues the conversation. And I'm very glad to be able to do your program mentioned a few times in that, and to look at both what are we doing right and what do we need to be doing better. So thanks.